Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. WeatherBrains episode number 760. This is the pre-show for Monday, August 10th, 2020. The magical time where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. All right. This is actually a restart. We tried to do this over on Google Meet, which was just about impossible. So we are back for round two. You can't get enough of us. All right. So now let's throw in the embed code really quickly so we can get that taken care of. And then we'll bring everybody back on the show here. Sorry about that. It is just a bizarre situation. Using Google Meet, you cannot stream to YouTube, which makes no sense at all. And I was trying to use it Google Meet and streaming it via Wirecast, and we couldn't get the audio from the Google Meet into the YouTube live stream. But let's invite everybody in because this will be our happy little place because this always works. Of course, as soon as I say that, guess what happens? It's not going to work. All right, so let's bring them in. And here we go. Here we go. And here we go. All right. Take two. This will be a better show anyway. The first open was weak. This will be strong. So we're going to bring them all in here. We have the correct embed code. And this is the first time we've actually started a show late in a while. This kind of goes back to the old Google Hangout days. Back in those days, I mean, we had no luck. And as we've learned, the bigger the IQ of the person we're trying to get on the show, the harder of a challenge it was. Jen, now this is working.
Hi again.
If you only knew how convoluted it is trying to get Google Meet to stream on their own platform.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
And, you know, for years, and Google has had this long history, and they might ban me for saying this because we're using YouTube here, but, you know, they create these products and then they just dump them. There was a program called Google Wave, kind of interesting, just went away. Google Reader just went away.
Mm-hmm.
Google Inbox, a marvelous.
But you can get $5 now because of
app for phones and tablets just went away.
Mm-hmm.
And so Google Hangouts over the air just went away. And that's what pushed us to this new platform. And, this has been easy. The guests, we get folks on quickly. It's streaming. It's just,
Except we can't have weather service people on it.
So, and again, it seems to me that Zoom has worked so hard to fix these security issues that they're more secure than Google now.
But we'll have Neil Jacobs on in 2 weeks. We can ask him.
Yeah, I'll have 2 weeks to figure this out. And I might need to get Einstein with me here but my goal is to figure out a way to get Google Meet streamed onto YouTube within 2 weeks.
That's my homework. You'll do it.
But we're all here. Hey, Brian, your video
is reclining.
Yeah, you're taking a nap.
Oh, yeah, I'm running this off my phone because my work laptop connects to a VPN, which is really slow. Let me figure this out. I guess that's on the phone. There we go.
Bingo. Yes. Now, Troy, I saw Troy, and I know he's coming.
We all got off when Troy got on. It was funny. Like, we saw his picture.
Troy has got his feelings hurt.
Hey, Troy's here. We're out of here.
If you'll forward that to Andy.
I did.
Make sure you did. Okay. Good.
I just did right now. So hopefully he'll be able to get on now.
He obviously has me blocked. I'm blacklisted.
Wow.
Oh, man. Oh, boy.
We'll get it together.
That's right.
Yeah, we've had this string of shows that have been on time, James. Now we're going to be late.
I'm telling you, we went back to these Google products, and look what happened.
There you go.
But everybody looks good. Everybody sounds good. Everybody is good. All right.
Oh, Troy's
Troy,
back.
we didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
Okay, sorry.
Troy.
Troy back.
I don't like any of y'all anyway. Hell with all of y'all.
Hey,
Just
Troy's
like
here.
the
Let's
minute-
leave.
The minute
I'm
got
still
on, we
loving
all
sort
hung
of
up.
way from Central Texas. Yeah.
Do we have any platforms Troy doesn't know about?
Yeah. All right. Let's record, and I'll get the intro right this week, and I think we're good. So, and I've got all the right drops in for this week.
Are you
Audio
going to
should be
play
good.
the little front thing, James?
Yes, I am, because I forgot last week. So, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
WeatherBrains is brought to you by the great folks at Midland Weather Radio. Every home, school, and business should have a NOAA Weather Radio, the official voice of the National Weather Service.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is WeatherBrains, episode number 760. This is the weekly show that's all about weather for August 10th, 2020, the dog days of summer. Troy, did you have a dog day of summer in Austin today?
Rough.
How hot was it in Austin today?
Well, it wasn't all that bad. I think it was only 103 or something like that today.
A cool spell.
Oh my goodness.
No,
Well-
really pretty quiet here today. We've had, which kind of worries me a little bit where we are with things getting drier. We've had a couple of wildfires around the area this afternoon that they've had to deal with. So that's beginning to worry us with at least conditions getting a little drier around here. But I think 103 at Camp Mabry and 101 out at Bergstrom today. So
111 at
Just
Sky
all-
Harbor, though. Is that what, 35th day of this year of over 110?
and Midway Airport with a gust to 72. So,
Mm,
there.
there you go.
Yeah, it's been kind of shaking and baking today.
Yep.
Kim, you're back. Welcome back.
Thanks, guys. Good to be with you.
How
It
hot
was-
was it in Norman today?
I was gonna say it was hot, not as hot as Central Texas ever, but thankfully just to the mid 90s. We had some days where again our dew points were up near 70 over the weekend, which that makes life really unpleasant. Fortunately, we're down to, it looks like 66. So just taking a couple notches off of the dew point makes all the difference. I walked outside today and thought, it's kind of a blast furnace, but it's a pleasant blast furnace.
It's a dry heat.
It's a dry heat.
Yeah. Bill, our dew point was what, 76 today? So
Oh, geez.
pretty rough. We have an ocean in the backyard back here. It just kind of works that way.
Ugh.
I can only pull
Jen?
weeds for about 20 minutes a day. That's all I can do. And then I come back inside.
Bill, the old weed puller.
Yeah.
Jen, what's the dew point in Ohio, Columbus?
It is, let's see, I had to look, 68. We got up to about 84 today. So it was really great. Remember last week I was saying how I was giddy because we were in the 70s, lows in the 50s. Oh, it was awesome. And then we came back up. So now I'm waiting to see if we're going to have a line of storms come through. It just now moved into far western Ohio.
Yeah, they just issued a severe thunderstorm warning for Flavor County. Isn't that you, Jen? Isn't that your county? Western Flavor County. Yeah.
Yes, every county's in Flavor County now. Yeah, Flavor. Man,
Wow.
you're going to get me in trouble.
With James?
Bill at billmurray.com.
What is
so
that? Why am I in
all the-
trouble for saying that? It's just
The haters, man. Didn't you learn from Cliff Mass and some of these people? You just don't say things sometimes.
Bill, you
I mean,
offended me. You offended me, Bill.
Which part? The Guy Fieri, the guy with the hair? What? I don't get it.
oh boy, Bill, bring in our guests before they bail out on
Guys
us.
are going to leave.
Yeah, they're going to run.
Tonight's show is the suggestion of WeatherBrains friend of the show, Jay Farlow. A tip of the hat to you, Mr. Farlow. I get to do that a lot. First guest WeatherBrain tonight's chief meteorologist for WHIO TV in Dayton, Ohio, McCall Vrydaghs. Welcome to WeatherBrains.
Thank you. And bravo for saying my last name correctly.
I know I usually don't do that. So
No, he usually screws them up. So
yeah, I usually am totally off base. So, a blind squirrel gets a nut every once in a while. So anyway, that's really good. But it's so awesome to have you. You came from New York, right, McCall?
Yeah. I'm originally from, well, it depends on who you're talking to in New York, but 60 miles north of the city. So I say I'm from downstate for most people, but if you live in New York City or Long Island, I'm upstate. But there's 5 to 6 more hours north of me that you could have traveled in New York. I grew up about 45 minutes from West Point. So that's hometown for me.
Well, that's beautiful territory. I really want to get up there sometime and see that part of the country. I know that's beautiful. We've got an email sitting in the inbox that Aubrey hasn't covered about cold air funnels, and I know they were in your neck of the woods. Maybe you and Andy can kind of take those on at some point tonight. Maybe somebody will read that email at some point. I know you guys covered that. So we got tons to talk to you about tonight, and thank you for taking time off to be here.
Thanks for asking me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we are really excited too. So our second guest, WeatherBrains, is an insurance industry meteorologist and operations analyst. He works for Assurant Specialty Products, our property in the Dayton, Ohio area. Brian Wood, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Brian, you're an old friend. We've had you on before, and with everything that's going on, and it's all crazy. The virtual Weather Ready Fest this year for the National Weather Association Foundation. What's happening this year with your part of what you normally would be doing with the NWA? Are you still involved in that? Is that going to get to happen virtually in any way? Anything happening with that?
Yeah, I was formerly involved with the student conference the past couple of years. I kind of turned that over to John Bangoff at NWS State College and Amber Liggett, who recently got a job, I believe, with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And they helped me over the past couple of years with that. And it was time for me to move on and let them take over. And they've got some really great ideas from what I hear. And the student conference will go on as planned. And hopefully, because of the fact that there won't be travel, we'll actually have a lot more students engaged with that part of the conference, and it'll be beneficial for them.
I think that's exciting. And so you're involved in the distant socials and that sort of stuff. Is that right?
I'm just on the board of directors now. So we've been doing a lot of talking about the past couple months about going virtual and the options and how we can best make it work for the membership. So a lot of discussion around that the past couple months.
Well, you can fill us in a little bit on that tonight. Thank you for being here. We're really excited to have your input on the show, and good to see you again. And finally, guest WeatherBrain number 3 is a forecaster at the National Weather Service in Wilmington. And Andy Hatsos, I really enjoyed your presentation at the Ohio State Symposium. It really was fascinating, and we're glad to have you here tonight to fill us in with the National Weather Service as part of the thing. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here. Glad you enjoyed the symposium presentation also.
Well, I'm glad to see that you didn't have to work 80 hours this week because we probably would have lost you issuing those warnings for Flavor County and all those places out there northwest of Columbus.
Busy night in our part of the area,
and
I pawned my shift off today so I could be here for WeatherBrains. And so to Kristen at the office, if you're watching this, first off, get back on the warning desk. Second off, thank you.
We are very grateful to Chris for that. We'll make it up to you. We'll send him something, James. What you got over there in the hole, James, that we could send?
Got a Country Boy Eddie cookbook. That's the best thing I've got right now. So it's on the way.
Well, this show tonight is right in the wheelhouse of our very own Jen Nairmore. So I just said, Jen, here, you take the show. Of course, she turned around with that crew of incredible young folks that she claims to be the mother of. And they just took off and ran with the show. So I'm just going to turn it over to Jen and let her run with it, and maybe I'll throw in a question or two somewhere along the way. But Jen, you lead us through this great, incredible show tonight.
I sure can. Yeah. Bill called me into last week, and he said this is a show made for you guys. And so I got on the phone last night, actually on the voice chat of Discord, the Tornado Talk Discord, and talked to our group of guys that are in our research room. And these guys are very dedicated to tornado history. And I said, here's the show. let's come up with the questions. And so all this is coming from my Tornado Talk research team. A lot of these guys do a lot of the writing on the website and really delve into the tornado history. So, as you guys think of questions too, let me know. I got the chat up here. Let me know when you have one to throw out. But I'm going to start with Andy. I thought we could just kind of set up this day. What we're going to talk about tonight is the Memorial Day outbreak from last year. I was in the middle of it because I'm up in Flavor County, northwest of Columbus. I'm in Union County for everybody who's wanting to know. I live in Union County. And so this is National Weather Service Wilmington territory. And I had a tornado warning that night. Everything, though, had kind of weakened as it was moving east, but there was still some rotation on some of those storms. So it was a big day for me personally, just because I was in my basement that night. So, Andy, I thought we could just start about the overall weather setup for that day that was leading to the trigger of an outbreak, and then kind of lead into how things changed that day. Initially, there was not really the greatest risk in the Dayton area. It was a low risk, and most of the higher risk was up into parts of Illinois and Indiana. And then as the day goes on, the tornado threat shifted and moved closer to the I-70 corridor. So I'm going to let you just kind of go and talk about how were things setting up and how did things kind of unfold to kind of bring that into the Dayton area?
Sure. So just to kind of give an overview of what we were looking at, it was in our forecast area, which is Southwest Ohio. We also cover Indiana and Kentucky, parts of those states, but all the tornadoes we confirmed were in Ohio. We had 19 in our forecast area. There were 21 total in the state of Ohio. That included an EF4, 3 EF3s, a whole bunch of the lower ratings. So was a lot to deal with. It was the largest tornado outbreak in our office's history, third largest tornado outbreak in the state of Ohio history also. But yeah, as you said, we walked in and we weren't expecting massive outbreak EF4 moving through metro area. Not that you maybe ever expect that, but just to back up a little, we had Saturday and Sunday of Memorial Day weekend were fairly busy days for us. We had thunderstorms each day. I forgot which one of the days had some severe weather. The other was mainly sub-severe storms, but they were long days. So we come in the next day, there's a slight risk. We're expecting, to be honest, a quote unquote typical severe weather event, damaging winds, hail, tornado or two kind of thing. We deal with that 15, 20 times a year. And I think a big part of that, if you look back even at some of SPC's products, is there was an expectation that there is going to be a congealing into a cold pool dominant storm mode, which of course that changes the threats you're expecting. Storms were expected to develop over Illinois, move into northern Indiana, then eventually into our area in the late evening and into the overnight hours. But I think when we started to look at some of the 12Z model runs, in particular some of the convective allowing models, we started to see that there were increased signs that discrete cells were maybe going to be the dominant storm mode that we were looking at. And so you look at model soundings and instability and especially low level wind shear, and then you drop discrete supercells into that conceptual model with the things we were seeing in the mesoscale environment. And all of a sudden now we got bells and whistles going off in our heads, basically thinking, okay, this could be a little bit higher end. So we have to change our game plan at this point. We coordinate with SPC to increase the tornado probabilities over our area. Admittedly, I think not as high as we would have liked to have gone. We increased our staffing for the evening. So I was in 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. I went home, got a short nap, and then came back to the office at 8 and sat down on the warning desk.
Yeah, so you're on radar that night, and you issued the first ever PDS tornado warning, right, for the Wilmington office?
Right. That's because this was the first big event we've had, the PDS tornado warnings, which is there's your base tornado warning, then there's the PDS warning, which is something that's only been implemented within the last few years, which is where you have a tornado damage threat considerable tag at the bottom of the warning. And you use that when you're expecting a higher end tornado, but not the worst of the worst. So it was the first time we'd ever used that at our office. I could, the process going into that, and then of course going into the tornado emergency, I could get into a little more later if you want me to, because that was certainly kind of a key turning point of the event.
Yeah, absolutely. I am curious. I was looking back with the guys last night. We were looking at the SPC outlook throughout the day, and then I was looking back at how many tornadoes were confirmed in Indiana, and there wasn't that many. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's 19 in Ohio. Do you, looking back post storm, is there anything that you guys have seen that really kind of triggered that change in Western Ohio that caused that to be more enhanced? Especially it was late evening, into early night. Is there anything that you guys saw that was like, oh, this is what caused it to be more enhanced?
Right. So when you're talking about storms that are developing and peaking in intensity in the late evening hours, we're talking 9, 10, 11, even midnight, you need a source of warmth and moisture. And the low level jet started really kicking in. There was a southwesterly flow in the low level jet kicking in across southern Indiana. And basically the nose of that was right into the area where you saw all the big supercells blow up in and initially just west and northwest of Dayton. And that's really when that low level jet kicked in. If you were just going to rely on the diurnal cycle, which you might do in some days, you would have expected perhaps the worst of it was going to be further upstream. But you blow the diurnal cycle out the window when you get a low level jet as strong as the one we had, and then with the warm front still kind of floating around our area, your flow right at the surface is very, very backed. And so the wind shear maxed out during that time frame. The low level jet maxed out at that time frame. So you've got the source of theta E and moisture and warmth, and you've got the source of lift. And it all just came together right at the same time. And I think one thing we knew looking at the mesoscale environment was whichever cell is on the southern end of this cluster of supercells is going to be the one that's going to take off. It's going to have one heck of an environment to work with.
So McCall, you're on the air. You're doing what, afternoons and evenings, or what is your shift now that you're in? So you're walking into this, and when did things start really going crazy for you? And I know at one point you had 5 tornado warnings at one time, 5 tornadoes on the ground simultaneously here. So how was your day?
So I came in the middle of the afternoon. I get to work around 2 p.m. And at that point, conditions didn't look to be as favorable for this outbreak. As we started to get into the 5 and the 6 o'clock news, I'm seeing things evolving. The conditions over the Miami Valley are looking more towards an intense evening. Even at that time, though, I didn't expect 19 tornadoes in the Wilmington forecast area, let alone 15 in my viewing area. In the Miami Valley, we don't normally have that type of an outbreak. We usually get the squall lines that create QLCSs, and we have these quick little spin ups. So it's outside of the scope of possibility in my brain to conceptualize that this is what's going to happen. But I did know that the possibility was there for tornadic activity. So at the end of the 6 o'clock newscast, which wraps up at 6:30, I do a little thing at the end of the show saying, looks like we're going to have an active night. Make sure that you're ready and prepared for these storms. We go to the dinner break hour, and I made sure to let my anchor know, listen, if you're going to have a dinner break and leave the building, I need you back at 8:30, because it looks like between 8 and 9 o'clock, that's when those storms are going to be moving in. And I'm confident we're going to have a tornado warning. So she was there, she was in house, and it was pretty much 9 o'clock. We got our first tornado warning, and it was also with a severe thunderstorm warning in the Richmond, Indiana area. And then pretty much after that, it was like dominoes, and it was just trying to keep up with everything that was happening. Very emotional, because as I mentioned, our tornadoes that we have in the Miami Valley typically don't show debris signatures. And we had clear debris signatures with multiple tornadoes, and trying to stress to people that these were damaging tornadoes. You're not going to see them. And then realizing that it's not just houses and trees that are being destroyed, but the possibility of people dying in this type of situation. So it was an extreme night for sure.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about, when I was on the call with the guys last night about, we wanted to kind of explore with you a bit more. What was it like to watch a tornado go through the city that you live in? And it's the most populated area in your broadcast area. What is that like to convey that type of information? And some of the challenges of saying, you're tracking 5 tornadoes at one time.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those challenges?
Well, it's a horrifying feeling. And before we had the big supercell, the EF4, we had the Salina tornado that already occurred, and I knew it had damage there. We already had reports of that. We had another tornado that looked like it was creating damage in the Ludlow Falls area. I did wind up becoming emotional. If you watch back, I choke up on air. I needed a couple seconds to gather myself. And then once we got into the big one, and I could see on radar all the streets and neighborhoods, and knowing the areas that they're going through are highly populated, and then moving into areas, especially in Old North Dayton, where they're the poorer of the groups of neighborhoods that this tornado is ripping through. It comes very close. If you were to look at the track where it actually picked up, is so close to Dayton Children's Hospital. And it was just so hard to know that this was all happening, and knowing, because I studied them and I've seen them in action, knowing what the destruction is and being able to convey that to the viewers was probably the hardest part for me. But I think it was clear after the first hour or so that this was a very volatile night. So,
yeah. And I know at one point there's the Trotwood tornado went through, and then there was a second one that was heading in behind that one. So how do you convey that? I mean, that's hard to communicate. You just told them there's a damaging tornado that goes through, and then now there's another one.
Yeah, it just basically explaining to them that the night is not over. What just happened is potentially going to happen again, and you need to just stay where you are until, we say that it's okay to come out from your safe spot, because really this type of situation was just ripping apart the whole northern and central part of our viewing area, and knowing where the next one was going to develop, because they were all over the place. Yeah, the big mammoth one was in northern Montgomery County, which is our main county, but they were everywhere if you look at where all of the tornadoes touched down. So it was really just stay where you are until all of these storms are out of our viewing area. And then even then, don't go out and try and see what has happened, because it's dangerous. There's no power and trees are down. And then collectively trying to get our news reporters safely in. There was a point of lockdown, and knowing where all of our reporters live. I have a meteorologist, Dante Jones, who's working for me tonight. He lives in the Trotwood area. One of our main anchors lives in Trotwood. We have another anchor that lives out in the Xenia area and have to come through Beaver Creek. That's where an EF3 went through. And pretty much having to tell them all to sit tight until it was safe for them to even come in, because they don't have the equipment. We're not Alabama. We're not Mississippi. We don't have these type of outbreaks, and our reporters are not trained to react in that type of situation.
Mm-hmm. So Brian, now I want to explore a little bit more about what you do for a living, because I'm fascinated with what you do. So explain to us what you do, and do you do things that during a real-time event, or is it mostly post-event?
I think most of the value I add to my company is post-event, but I certainly do forecasting ahead of time, whether it's severe weather or hurricanes, things that our company needs to know to be ready to deploy people to help. Because ultimately, as an insurance company that works with the mortgage industry, we need to have people on the phones to respond. We have people that need to be able to respond to sign checks and make sure that in a major disaster where there's a sudden spike of volume, that we can respond to that. So a lot of that forecasting is not only just the weather itself, but helping them understand what the staffing needs might be, and do we need to deploy to this area, and help out in that regard. So I do forecasting, but a lot of the post-event catastrophe analyst work is my main job.
Okay, so you're pretty much kind of like me. You're just watching everything as a resident, and what was it for you? In terms of staying safe and for your family and what have you, watching this unfold.
Sure. So my mother-in-law lives in the Trotwood area, and thankfully just south of where the tornado hit for her. And that was a concern. My sister lives in Huber Heights, which is just downstream. And for those that are familiar with the tornado, it began to right move and turn south. And at the time when it was moving through Trotwood, it was moving due west. And so I was on the phone with her, making sure that they were in their bathroom with a mattress on her and her kids. So knowing that there are people that you love out there that are potentially in the path of what was obviously a violent tornado was very, very frightening. And for me, myself, I live in a base house that was a house near the Air Force Base that was built in the 60s. And I'm comfortable sheltering in the basement most times, but with what was clearly a violent tornado, I didn't feel comfortable with the house. So we weren't sure how much it was going to right turn. Knowing that we could have been in the path, we actually left. My wife was 5 months pregnant with our now daughter. And for me, I just couldn't fathom the thought of what if our house falls apart inward in the basement and something happens. So I knew I could take elevated highways out and not get involved in flash flooding, which we had. And then thankfully it moved about 2 miles south of our house. We did have about an inch to golf ball sized hail that fell on our house, dinged up my wife's car, but I had a brand new hail resistant roof. So I was one of the few people in my neighborhood that actually didn't have a claim on their house. Everyone else got a brand new roof.
Hmm.
But it was
Andy-
terrifying. There's something about
yeah.
watching. I watch tornadoes. I survey tornado and hurricane damage for a living, but there's something just extra frightening when it's happening where you are and you have a very acute knowledge of how bad it could very well be. There's this, it's a feeling you can't possibly describe with words.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Andy, I really like you to explore what it was like to be on radar that night. And everything is going crazy. And what is it like to issue warnings in that type of a setup? And talk more about the PDS tornado warnings and the tornado emergency and all that. Just tell us what that was like.
Sure. I was a primary radar operator that night, which means I'm responsible for the first warnings and then sort of, kind of traffic control with the other radar operators. For an event like this one, you can't really have a specific plan going in where you know exactly how it's going to go. It's a weather event, so it's going to behave however it's going to behave. But what we have is a framework that we work within where everyone knows their expectations, the roles that they're assigned to do. And then if those need to change on the fly, which certainly an event this big, they're going to change on the fly. We just communicate. It's so important. So for example, McCall mentioned the warnings coming in Wayne County, Indiana, then into the Dayton area. Those were the storms I was warning on first. Then we had storms moving a few counties north of there, which eventually produced the Salina EF3 in Mercer County, Ohio. And I had to say, hey, Brian, I'm at my limit. Can you jump in and catch these? And he said, yes. So then the storm following behind the big supercell that produced the second tornado in Montgomery County is like, hey, Kristen, I'm going to throw a warning out on this. Can you jump in then and take this storm the rest of the way? She says, yeah, I got it. So we ended up with 5 different people issuing tornado warnings that night. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot. We had 37 warnings come out of our office. It'd be easy to say it was chaos. It was not chaos. It was always controlled. So yeah, and in an event like this one, you need to have a coherent strategy with the warnings where you're working with the other radar operators, but also even within yourself, because the whole, the concept of respect the polygon, that starts with the person issuing the polygon. And it's obviously very different if you've got a pulse type environment. You're not going to be able to plan out in advance as much, but when you have something that's as well defined and to a degree predictable as this event was, the storm motions were fairly predictable once they got going. You got to be thinking about what the radar picture looks like 15 minutes from now, 30 minutes from now, as you're drawing every box, every vertex of every box, so that when the event continues to evolve, you've got polygons in place that make sense. You never want to run into a situation where you have a circulation exiting a box before you've got the next one out. And one good thing, if there is any good thing about an event like this, is you should never run into that kind of problem. So I guess the whole process of the tornado emergency, going back to the PDS, the considerable tag. So McCall mentioned the storm near Ludlow Falls, West Milton. This was southern Miami County, Ohio, and that was an EF3 also. And this is, it's another part of the whole teamwork thing is another one of my coworkers, Scott, who his primary job that night was, I think, working on the aviation forecast. But he's the one who puts the idea in my head and says, hey, you think you need to upgrade this warning to the next level, the considerable tag or whatever. And actually, I didn't end up doing it for that storm. I think in retrospect, I probably should have. But now the idea is in my head. So when I see the big one going into the Dayton area, starting to really ramp up, that idea is in my head, and it's an easy decision. But it's a whole nother story when you go to tornado emergency. And what I mean by that is, tornado emergency is the highest of the high, the most dire level of alert that we can possibly issue. So you can't miss with those. Tornado emergency, you've got to be 100% on it. There's a Wikipedia page, if you go look at it, it's like list of tornado emergencies in the United States, and you'll see there's a lot of them on that verify with like EF1, EF2, and that's not really what a tornado emergency is for. So I think, I really got to be convinced. And it was the 10:51 p.m. volume scan coming in on our radar. And I'm watching it in real time, every slice that comes in, and there's debris on the 4.0, and there's debris on the 5.1, and there's debris on the 6.4. And I'm watching these come in real time, and I realize, for a split second, I'm the only person on the planet that knows that there's debris being wafted 4 miles into the air from this tornado that's moving into a very densely populated suburban and urban area. And so if you want to know my moment where this event hits and is real, and you can't ignore what's going on a personal level, on a human level, that's it for me. And at that point, yeah, I have the other factors you need for tornado emergency also. We've got the rotational velocities that are, I think, 80 to 90 knots. And you have some spotter and amateur radio reports coming in of significant damage. At that point, that's the only logical choice, tornado emergency, and I got that out there.
You guys are really the unsung heroes of weather, the National Weather Service offices. I don't think people really realize what all that you guys do to make those decisions. And, we couldn't do what we do as broadcasters or meteorologists in any way without you guys. So can you lead us a little bit, Andy, and we can open it to who did surveys? Were you on the survey, Andy?
Yeah, I did an aerial survey in a helicopter with the Ohio State Highway Patrol the day after the event. And then I ground surveyed the southern Miami County EF3 the next day. So, yeah.
Okay. Take us through maybe some, and anybody can chime in on, talk about some of the bigger tornadoes and some of the damage that was seen. And also, why was Trotwood given an EF4 rating?
Sure. I'll touch on that part and then open it up to the others. The first day that we went out, we had a team that went to the Trotwood Dayton EF4. We had another team that was out on the Beaver Creek Greene County EF3, which it wasn't until later that day that we realized that there was actually a break. There was a cycle in the supercell, and those were actually two separate tornadoes. But the team that surveyed the EF4 couldn't get into the hardest hit areas that day. It was gridlocked with just all the chaos of people cleaning up, emergency crews out fixing things, probably some Gawker delays in there also. They couldn't get everywhere. So thankfully, because I did the aerial survey of that whole area, we were able to then look at the pictures I got. I think it was like 1,300 pictures I took from the helicopter that day. Wore the camera out pretty good, I think. We were able to pinpoint, okay, they couldn't get into here, but we could see there's some homes that are pretty heavily damaged here, some apartment buildings pretty heavily damaged here. So 2 days later, they were able to go back out and get into all those places. The home damage was all 140, 150, a little bit of 160 type. That's all EF3 range. And it was an apartment complex along the banks of the Stillwater River, which has some higher EF scale numbers associated with when you have well-built multifamily homes. This was a 3-story apartment complex that had significant removal of walls on the upper level, roof, even some parts were kind of a good chunk of the 3rd level was removed. And you combine that with some tree damage right across the river. I think it was a swath of trees about 1,200 feet in diameter that was pretty much mowed down. You had some that were nubbed, some that were debarked, even a few, like the whole trunk of the tree was like bent over but still kind of intact. And it was just really high-end tree damage. And so it was really that spot where the EF4 rating was picked up.
Most of the patho was mostly EF3 for the Trotwood.
Yeah, that tornado was 20 miles long. And I think talking to people who surveyed that, it was probably about 11 miles of it was EF3. The EF4 segment was maybe half a mile long.
Okay.
The EF3 damage was really consistent through the Trotwood and Clayton areas. Clayton's just to the west of Trotwood and back into Brookville. The one interesting thing I saw the next day when I was surveying was I went as Andy mentioned, there are a lot of places that were off limits at the time the day after, but there was an area with about $400,000 homes, very high-end homes in the Clayton area that were heavily damaged. And theoretically, these brand new, well-built homes should have held up well. But the biggest problem I saw was garage doors blowing in and allowing the winds to sweep through the houses and blow out other walls or ceilings. And so these well-built homes that otherwise would have probably done okay had very unique weak points, mostly through the garage doors, which were not reinforced. One had a giant 2-story picture window that was facing the direction that the tornado came. It blew in, and you could actually see the walls pancake horizontally through the house where that wind had shoved in through that glass picture exterior wall. And it's something that is very common that we see not only on tornado surveys, but hurricane surveys as well, is that heavy wind damage tends to start at those weak points, especially the garage doors.
Yeah, and Old North Dayton, just about 2 days after the outbreak, and that was with the EF4 tornado track. Unfortunately, that is low income area, and I host a podcast as well with meteorologist Kirsty Zontini, and we invited Brian to come out to be a guest on our program, and Brian can speak to this as well. It was just devastation there. Unfortunately, they have one grocery store for Old North Dayton, and without that grocery store, people didn't have any access to food. So it was, part of my job, not only as to tracking the storms and alerting people during the event, is getting the personal stories in the days, weeks, months and follow. And to me, that story sticks out very much to me, to think that people have money to buy food but have no way to get the food. They did set up a pantry, and I think even to this day that grocery store doesn't exist, but they've created some kind of transportation to take people to the grocery store out of town so that they can get their groceries. So that's the one story that I continually follow up on. And a woman who lives in that area is just getting her home rebuilt now. So.
Are there any other, that's another thing I wanted to explore too, or any of those other type of stories, as you're going out and meeting folks and in the midst of the surveys or what have you, that any other of those type of interactions or the community type stories you guys want to share that really sticks out in your mind?
I can share one from the West Milton EF3. That was a tornado that I think we were expecting kind of EF2 out of based on what we knew, but then we survey it, and we were surveying 36 hours after. So this was the second day of surveys, and we found a few homes that were low end EF3, and we're just about finished up. We're kind of checking the last few cross streets through the path, and we find some I think modular homes or something along those lines that were one was a mobile home that was flipped, and then there was a manufactured home next to it that was pretty much shredded for the most part. And we're like, no, we got to stop here. There were a lot of people outside, so we went and talked to them. And so I'm kind of naturally an introvert, and it's not always the easiest thing to go and speak to people in this way, but it's part of the job. We need to know. I think we need to know what they went through and things like that. So in this home, there was a man and a woman that were living there, and they went when the tornado impacted them, and inside the interior restroom. This one floor manufactured home, and the interior restroom walls were the only forward facing walls still left of this home. And the only reason the door to the restroom didn't get blown open during it was because a couch had gotten lodged up against it. And so these people really were in the thick of it to an extent that I think about the stress of being on the radar that night. No, it's nothing compared to like what these people have to deal with. And so I don't know the best way. I have the empathy, and I certainly feel for these people, but it's so hard to know the best way to communicate that with them when half of their possessions are a quarter mile out into the barren field to the east of where their home used to be. It's really difficult.
Yeah, and going back to the Old North Dayton area, not only did they have one grocery store, a lot of these homes are older, they're family heirlooms. They've been passed down, so they don't have mortgages on them anymore. People that are usually not always, but sometimes down on their luck and can't afford insurance. And since they don't have a mortgage on their house, insurance is not required. And so when they hear that I'm in insurance, they start talking about how they really thought they couldn't afford it, but now they wish they had it. And your heart breaks for them. What can you possibly say that can mend their heart or make them feel better? And for me, I think the takeaway from that is, what can we do in the insurance industry to reach out to people who might not be able to afford traditional homeowners insurance, and it's not required on their house? People who need coverage still. Is there a way to spread that risk through the city? Not sure how. We don't have all the answers, but there's got to be a way we can help those people out, because ultimately they already don't have a lot of income. They don't have the financial need to the financial means to repair their house, and they don't have the backstop to repair their house. A lot of people that were hit by this tornado were able to rebuild their homes within a year and a half because they had insurance, and these people are still struggling with that because they didn't have insurance and they don't have the means to rebuild, and they need volunteers to come help them rebuild. And we had that for a while, but with the coronavirus, there's a lot of volunteers who weren't able to make it out, people who are generally retired but are also high risk for health, that had the free time to come out and help people. It was too risky for them to travel to our area to help with repairs. So there's people who are still struggling with that. And what can you possibly do?
Brian, did you see any move post outbreak toward fortified homes or any of these programs that strengthen home construction in the wake of the tornadoes, maybe to make them more resilient for future outbreaks?
Yeah, that's something I definitely preached around here with the local stations, and I did some live shots with the Weather Channel as well, as to talk about safer home building. And you mentioned the Fortified Home Program, which is run through the IBHS, Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They do amazing research on how homes fall apart in storms, and how even with just an extra $1,000 or $2 can significantly reduce your chance of your home just flying apart, even in a stronger storm. So that's something that we're preaching here. And what we really need is the governments to work on building codes as well. It's something that is not easily done from a political motivation. No one wants to put extra laws in place or strengthen the laws, because it adds construction costs to people, or for people who are rebuilding their house or getting a new roof. It took Oklahoma 4 major tornadoes in 20 years for them to move their building codes higher. And we are an area that, even though we don't have as many violent outbreaks, we have a history of violent tornadoes. And even though it's a lower risk overall, they do happen, and we've got to find a way to improve that. It's not just an Ohio problem, but nationwide.
Andy and Brian and McCall, question for you, and it's sort of where Bill, I think, is going here to some degree. And I would be particularly interested, McCall, from the broadcast side, to know, following this event, how many times maybe you heard, "We just didn't think this would happen here."
Yeah,
we just didn't think this would happen here. And I guess, Andy, from the Weather Service standpoint, and Brian, from the industry standpoint, important industry standpoint, insurance, and then McCall, from your point, which is very wide, has there been much change? Do you think there is an increased awareness of these types of tornadoes, even though they're going to be admittedly pretty rare?
Yeah, the awareness has spiked. There is always an overcorrection, and anytime there was a storm, is it going to be an outbreak? Is it going to be like Memorial Day? And I think there's this new generation now, because if you go back 30 years or so, everybody was like, "Is this a Xenia tornado?" But now there's this new crop of kids that didn't live through that, my age, millennials and things like that now everything is getting compared to it. At first, it can be tough to deal with, to calm the nerves. And even now, 1 year later, but I think now people are paying attention more to what's happening around them and realizing that these can happen anywhere. And just being prepared is the best thing that they can do, know their plan. And it just reminds me of a story of this one family that I talked to after the tornado outbreak when I was touring the damage in Trotwood. And they said, they heard the sirens, they got the warning, and they didn't do anything about it. Then it got really, really quiet, and they heard the winds kick up, and they ran out of the bedroom as the violent winds smashed into their home. And they always knew where their safe spot was, but they didn't have enough time to get there because they waited so long. And so now I try to tell people, know your safe place and then know your plan B. Where are you going to go if you can't get to plan A? What's plan B? And I've just seen a lot more people paying attention to what's going on. And kudos to Andy and everybody that was working at the Weather Service that night. If you look at the lead time of those warnings, it really doesn't get any better than that. And Andy, can you say what's the shortest lead time and the longest lead time?
Yeah, we had of all the tornadoes, you add it all up, we had I believe 100 miles of tornado track, combined time on the ground of 3 hours, and every minute of every mile of every tornado was warned in advance. That's really hard to do, but the shortest lead time on any of the touchdowns was 6 minutes. And there were some segments of the tornadoes, including a large chunk, really the whole thing of the EF4 tornado, where our lead times were 20, 30. I think we had some segments that were pushing up close to 40 minutes of lead time. So it's interesting because you give people this much lead time, and yet you still hear a lot of stories, like McCall just said, where people didn't immediately take action. And I think that's one thing where there's still a lot to learn about how people receive and act on warnings. Most people were home. This was the evening at the end of a holiday weekend. I think people were home. I think people were tuning in to watch McCall and her counterparts at the other stations, receiving the information, but that doesn't mean they were acting on them right away. I mean, when we're giving them 15, 30 minutes of lead time, I think, that doesn't mean that they're, receiving the warning and then going in their basement and taking 15 minutes to play Yahtzee before the tornado blows the roof off. It's, we just know it doesn't work that way. I want to read a quote. This is from a Dayton Daily News article. Just to set this up, the city of Dayton does not have outdoor warning sirens, which I'm not going to get into that, but that's just the pretext for this. So the quote was from a person who was impacted by the tornadoes. "I feel if there are no sirens, then our lives were seriously put in danger," said the person who noted that she learned about the tornadoes from her cell phone. So people are receiving the warnings, but they're not even understanding that they're receiving the warning. And that gets into social science, and that gets into a whole lot of other stuff that I am far from being the expert on. But it's really, it's really, really interesting the way technology has changed the way warnings go out. But it's still sort of an uphill battle sometimes, even in a really successful event like this, where we had very minimal loss of life and injuries and things like that. Still kind of an uphill battle for getting people to really take the action that they need to take right away.
Hey, Andy, tell me though that, and this goes for our friend Bruce Jones, which will join us in just a little bit. Please tell me that there has been increased awareness, at least by the public, for NOAA weather radio in this case. Do you feel like that's happened in the area since last year?
I think so. I think we always at the Weather Service, we promote the heck out of weather radio.
Yeah.
We've got a transmitter that serves the Dayton area. There's 9 in our area total that we run. And
but Andy, I know you're interested in it.
Right.
What I'm asking is, do we feel like we got the public? Because it's like pulling damn teeth sometimes. That's the whole thing, is we've got to get the public where they get into this. Brian, that we deal with that. We've got to increase that awareness on that other side. We've got to have people coming to you, Andy, and to the Weather Service saying, I want to know how to do this and what it means and how I can set it up. So I just wonder if there was an increased public interest and maybe some coverage from the media, McCall, on the importance of weather radio.
Yeah, and I think it's more than the weather radio. I think a lot of people are getting more and more interested in finding it, whether it's the weather radio or their cell phone, to get that information. But I saw an uptick of people wanting to learn more about the weather. Unfortunately, we had COVID starting, but we had the Skywarn training, and there's tons of people that want to get involved with skywarn and understanding what's happening around them. And I think Andy could speak to that as well, as far as people registering to come to the skywarn training. We were supposed to have the advanced class this year, but Andy.
We do the advanced class every year in either Dayton, Cincinnati, or Columbus. It was supposed to be in Dayton this year. It was going to be a big, huge to do. We were going to have the biggest crowd ever, and unfortunately, that was one of the many casualties of the current situation. So we did do 3 virtual online spotter classes, just a basic level class, just to get people the basics of what they need to know so they can report the weather to us. We did 3 of them. We'd never done one before. In an average year, our office usually does around 40 spotter talks, and we train about 2,000 spotters total every year in our in-person spotter talks. But this year, in these 3 virtual classes, I believe our number was close to the 2,000 that we normally do in 40 in-person classes every year. And we hit the registration cap on the first 2, and like, we're just going to keep doing them until we we can't keep packing people in. The response was way more than we were expecting, and there were a lot of questions coming in during those talks. People asking questions about the Dayton outbreak. I think it really increased the level of interest, like you're saying, McCall. People are interested and they want to know more about what happened, and they want to know more about the weather so they can be prepared for next time.
Yeah, and I think that we are very fortunate in our small little market that we have, that there is such a good relationship with all of the stations and the weather service in Wilmington and Skywarn and emergency management. There is a great relationship where we communicate and talk about things. We just this past year had a little conference amongst ourselves, breaking those boundaries and I think those stigmas of what each one of these branches are about. And I know that when it came to emergency managers, they were afraid to say certain things to the media because they think that we're just going to take that info and run with it and make it such a big deal. But that's not what it is that we're doing, and that they can trust the meteorologists to take the information that they're providing so that we can pass that information along to the public to make sure that they're safe. So I think we're working really hard to inform the public and make this a team unit here in the Southwest Ohio area.
I love it. We can't do what we do without what you do and without what the emergency management community does. It's all one big partnership, and that's the way to get the job done.
Yeah, that's very obvious in this situation. And Andy, we're very lucky to have one of the best social scientists in the business tonight here with Kim Cloco McClain. Kim, I want you to ask your question, but what I'm going to ask involves you. Andy, to me, one of the most famous tornado towns in the country is right there in Greene County, in Xenia. If you had to ask me to immediately off the top of my head name a famous tornado town, I would probably say Xenia or Guin or one of those towns. But obviously, as McCall referenced, the shelf life of that institutional knowledge is somewhere south of 45 years.
Yep.
So what is that knowledge length, Kim? I would think everybody in Greene County still runs around with their hair on fire every time there's a tornado warning issued, and that's probably not the case.
It's really interesting you ask that question, because that's something I have been studying, trying to figure out can we map people's perceptions of risk for different places, how risk prone people feel their town is, to climatology. And it turns out that you can to a large degree. So we found that tornadoes that are within 5 miles in 5 years are the most impactful. And after that, the impact of those tornadoes tends to fall off some. There are exceptions, though. So if you have some of these historic events, the big Moore tornado, for example, our data set was really centered in Oklahoma. If you have some of those big events and people who are sort of near them, then the duration can be longer, can go to be generational, be more like 20 years that it shows up. And there are also really interesting artifacts we find with communities that are near the community that got hit. So Norman is an example of this, where people feel spectacularly risk safe. They feel like this town is actually protected from tornadoes because they'll go to Moore instead. And so there is an accumulation in the psyche of the residents that, some of it is just an individual carrying it on and making these determinations for themselves. Some of it is the socially constructed knowledge about places and how risk prone they are. And if you get these big generational events, that endures, and the storytelling, goes on to affect more and more people. And what it is that's the secret sauce to determining exactly what gets carried on, and what places people ascribe that to then being relevant for. I mean, that's still to me an enormous mystery and a really fascinating aspect of this.
You mentioned that, and Xenia not only had the 1974 F5, but in 2000 there was an F4 tornado, and that really reinforced the fact that in people's minds around here that Xenia was the place for tornadoes. It's kind of our more that in that way, and so that was a common refrain after this tornadoes. I only thought the violent ones happen in Xenia because they're lower in the valley, and that's why they happen there. The old wives' tales start coming out.
Did they have one also in 2002, Brian, or was
they've
that
had a
the
couple
same one you're
weak
talking
ones
about?
since the
Wasn't
2000.
there one that hit? Oh, that's Van Wert that got the tornado.
Yeah, Van Wert was the
Yeah.
November 2002.
Right.
Yeah, and I went back and looked at Thomas Grzoulis's wonderful tornado Bible, as I call it. We found multiple EF3s and 4s that happened in Montgomery and Greene County, but they were pre-storm data era, and they were probably equally as violent as some of the ones we've had in 1974, 2000, and 2019. But there's no real record of them outside of Grzoulis's work, and people just aren't aware of that. And so when I give presentations on that tornado, I bring it up, and people go, "Oh, I had no idea." It's just recency bias and optimism bias.
There's undoubtedly that. And did it really affect something? Did it affect a lot of people? Were there a lot of people who were injured or killed in the event, or was it near a very visible population center? I mean, we've had tornadoes in Norman. One of the things that's so quizzical about the Norman thing is that we've had very significant tornadoes in the city limits in the last 10 years. When I was in grad school, I had 4 EF4s or EF5s come within 2.5 miles of my apartment, in that time frame. And you'd think that that would be a jarring thing, right? But it just wasn't absorbed into the social consciousness because they either hit the far east side of town, which is far from the highways, far from sight, and where the poorer populations live. So it's not central to, economic activity where more, keeps getting hit right where it crosses the stinking highway. More is this teeny tiny little 4x4 mile square. And it just so happens that a very visible and economically significant part keeps getting hit. There are a lot of attributes that just make people remember or not remember. It's all about your social nearness, so how emotionally tied you are to the outcome. So I'm really interested in hearing all of this. It also, what we hear in Oklahoma, I heard it in the Southeast too, studying the April 27th event. You're hearing it in Ohio. All of this is very, very common. So with that in mind, Brian, I'm interested in learning a little bit more from your experience. And I think the rest of the guest panelists could have some insight on this too, but especially from your insurance industry perspective. Could you tell us a little bit more about the patterns of recovery after the event? This is something that we don't hear a whole lot about often with tornadoes and tornado outbreaks, but we tend to focus so much on the warnings and trying to get people into shelter in the immediacy of the threat, when you guys have highlighted there are some neighborhoods that were hit that were lower income, for example. You've highlighted that there was perhaps a disconnect from important food sources for some of these people. I'd love to hear if you know a little bit more, could say a little bit more about the broader patterns of recovery in the area. What has that been like?
Yeah, it takes a lot longer than people realize, because ultimately when you have severe weather, hurricanes going on, there's a lot of media coverage. It draws attention to it. And eventually the next storm happens and the media coverage shifts. And you might have a revisit during an anniversary, for instance, where they'll come back and talk about it. But the work that we do, we work with mortgage companies to help them, because the mortgage companies own the homes and until they're paid off along with the homeowner. And so what we do in working with claims actually are working through the duration of the house rebuilding process. So we're there the entire time, even after your state farms and farmers, they cut the check and walk away. we're still working with those homeowners until the completion of construction. And in a lot of cases, these violent tornado outbreaks, it can take a year or two for most people to rebuild. And even then, you will see quite a few people that will just walk away. You go even today to Greensburg or Joplin. I was in Pleasant Grove, Alabama, not too terribly long ago, and there's a lot of empty lots because people, they just can't face the memories of looking out and seeing where their neighbor's house used to be and it's an empty lot too, or their neighbor I've heard one person say, I can't go back there because my neighbor died or my dog died, and they're just awful, awful memories, and they have to walk away. And so you have these empty lots that are reminder scars. Even when you get 75% of people back in an area after a year or two, there's still very visible reminders that things are forever changed. And when I go back and I try to make a point when I'm traveling to visit places that have been impacted and walk the paths and eventually talk to people because they're curious why I'm there. And they share those stories, that the memories are still very harsh for them years later. And so even with the physical recovery completed for a lot of people, the anguish, when just a typical storm happens, they hear a clash with thunder and lightning, that doesn't heal the way you can rebuild a home.
I'm glad to hear some of the rebuilding is going on. There is that recovery that's taking place. McCall or Andy, what have your experiences been with the recovery after this point?
About 6 months after the outbreak, I did a feature called Walking the Path of the Storm, and I walked the 20-mile path from Brookville to Dayton to Riverside and spoke with a bunch of people. And I heard a lot of the same stories as what Brian was just saying, of people leaving because it was just such a tragic reminder to look outside and see what used to be their neighborhood that they grew up looking completely different. And a lot of the areas where the tornadoes came through, in particular the EF4, were very green neighborhoods. In fact, there was one part in the Harrison Township area, which I believe was close to the peak EF4 winds. 400 trees in Sinclair Park were completely destroyed, and they were estimated to be 200 plus years old. And it was a canopy that was, in this area. And this one woman said that she used to not be able to see the Stillwater River, but now she can. She used to not be able to see the city lights from downtown, but now she can. And so it was just heartbreaking. And then to visually see it, it's impressive to me to drive into these areas and you realize that this is not what it looked like before. And to have lived there and lived through it. One woman saying that she just heard bang, 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 bang. And then she realized at that moment that it was all the trees were going. And some people, put on their bootstraps and they say they're going to stay. Nothing's going to make me leave. And then there's others that it's just too traumatizing and you can just completely understand and relate. And this tornado went right across Interstate 75, knocking into all of these cars that were completely unaware that there was even a tornado there. It's dark out. And you just drive up Interstate 75 and on the left and the right-hand side, it's just gone. There was a hotel that was like a staple of Dayton, even though nobody went to this hotel anymore. It was shut down, is gone now. And it's just this big empty space. So it's very sad to see, but to have to live through it and then to live there, I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, I think of some of the stories that I heard from Mike Robbins, the emergency management director of Mercer County, Ohio, who also spoke at the Ohio State Symposium with the rest of us about the event. And he's working basically nonstop for weeks and weeks, and then even still working on this stuff months after the event to try to do the things that an emergency manager has to do when so many people. Salina is not a huge city, but it was a pretty significant amount of homes that people live in that were destroyed. I just a few months ago, I took a drive through Salina, so it was probably about a little over a year after the event. And at the very least, I could say I was happy to see that the areas that were hit, there were a lot of new construction that was just about done. There were some homes that were done, So it's on the right track now, but it takes a while when the devastation is as much as you have from a EF3, EF4 type tornado going through a populated area like this.
Brian, much earlier, you mentioned the right moving tornado, spared your family. Andy, talk to, lots of folks that watch the show are interested in things like that. You obviously have a lot of proficiency in observing that mesocyclone on the radar and, understanding, hey, this one may be about to, cycle, this one may be about to turn into a right mover. Talk about that process for a minute and what people can watch for when they're using Gibson Ridge, watching in real time, that can help them see what's going on inside that supercell.
Sure, there was just a number of meteorologically interesting things that went on in this event, but that was one of the most interesting because based on the tracks, based on the radar signatures, I actually think, and we confirmed it this way, that the EF4, or what was left of it at the tail end of its track, and the Beaver Creek EF3 were probably on the ground simultaneously for maybe 30, 60 seconds, something along those lines. So it was a scenario where the tornado develops basically under the mesocyclone. And then as it's getting about halfway across Montgomery County, basically when it's about peak intensity, you could see the rear flank downdraft of the storm is outrunning the circulation at the lowest level. And so we're never just looking at the lowest slice. So you pan up a couple of tilts and we see the broader mesocyclone up 5,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet of the storm is kind of also starting to outrun the tornadic circulation at the lowest level to some extent also. So as the mesocyclone is getting a little bit out ahead of the tornado, now the tornado is underneath sort of the western edge of the mesocyclone, which of course has in a cyclonic flow, is going to have a southward component to its motion. So this tornado takes a right turn. You can clearly see it's behind the RFD. It's probably its inflow is choked off, so it's not going to live forever. But then you look at where the mesocyclone is at like 5,000 feet. You look at where the RFD is now interacting with the updraft, and it's kind of right underneath there. And you can watch as, and you can see this all from our radar in Wilmington, which was pretty close to the storm, and we were running in Sales 3, so we had pretty good temporal resolution of the data. And you can see this new circulation develop underneath the mesocyclone, right where the RFD and the updraft are interacting, as you've still got this other tornado that's like 1.5 miles displaced behind all of that, and it's fading out. The new one develops and goes from not existing to EF3 strength in the span of like 2-3 minutes.
Wow. One thing we were exploring in our talk last night with the Tornado Talk crew was how can we learn to forecast for these type of events? Because we were talking about how this was a late evening into the overnight event on the kind of the more far extent of the tornado zone. And then this year we had Nashville and Cookeville, rather similar later night events, kind of on the, edge of the 2% threat. I know the threat increased for the Dayton area as the day went on, but initially we didn't think it was going to be a big deal. But so 2 events, similar outcomes in terms of violent tornadoes. How can we use this as an opportunity to create better forecasts in these type of events? Are there some similarities that we can draw from?
Yeah, from what I saw of the Tennessee event, there definitely were some similarities, not just in the setup, but I think in the way the storms behaved too. But I'm not that familiar with all the specifics of the mesoscale environment for that one. But for at least for ours, man, I really think, Brian Wood and I, he's on this call here, and we've talked about this so many times about the conversations he and I were having the afternoon before. And we're sending model soundings to each other. We're like, oh man, look at this. Oh man, look at this. And we're getting concerned. Obviously at the office, we're concerned. But one thing that is really, really hard to do is change the paradigm. What's a great example? Today is a great example. You had parts of the Chicago area that were under a marginal risk at the start of the day, I think. 2 SPC outlooks later, they're in a moderate. They've got a derecho ripping through, tearing up the northern half of Illinois, basically. So could we have done that better in our event? I think so. I think it's really hard to once the ball is rolling down the hill, to change its direction. We tried, and SPC tried with us, and even still, it's like you can look at soundings and everything, but to say, oh, this is going to be the big one on a day where that morning we thought we'd be issuing 5 or 6 severe thunderstorm warnings, that's still really hard to do. So I think part of it is a mental thing. And from a meteorological standpoint, I really think nailing storm mode is crucial, because I think if we knew we were going to have discrete supercells that literally never developed a cold pool, our expectations would have been a little different. Storm mode is a really big deal when you've got hot mesoscale environments like this one.
I think looking back at the Dayton event, and I think this is true of Nashville, is you don't know exactly how the low level wind field is going to set up. And the one thing we noticed around 6 o'clock, about 4 hours before the tornadoes really got bad, was all the winds on our observation areas, the ASOS stations, were all starting to move out of the southeast. When you had the low level jet coming out of the southwest, and the jet stream, I think, was close to due west. So when the wind started aligning in a way that you were going to have very strong rotation in the lowest levels of the atmosphere, I think that was similar with Nashville, where it kind of came together late. It's a nowcasting type thing where I don't know. Certainly the risk could have been higher, but I don't think anyone could have realized what was going to happen until you really saw that wind field take shape just a couple hours ahead of the storm.
Yeah, I
And I'd have to
agree.
say it was a little difficult too, from like the media broadcasting side, is that all of this is happening and evolving in between shows. So having to get that information out, I had to do it through social media and try and really get people to pay attention. Like, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen before 11 o'clock when you see me again. And as Andy and Brian were messaging back and forth, I think I was messaging them individually, and we're just talking about everything that's changing and evolving.
Brian, I've got one for you, and this the basis of this. And I realize this is not Central Oklahoma, but in my time in Kim's territory with Dr. Kevin Clazel in the past, with the Moore, Oklahoma tornadoes that we've seen, and being there in the weeks and the months afterwards, to watch the reconstruction sort of take place, and to see people in Central Oklahoma rebuilding with safe rooms, actually built in the homes, and just kind of watch that, to me, is impressive. And while I don't really probably expect many safe rooms to be built, but Brian, you, in the wake of this, do you at least see things where, Tim Marshall would be proud of the fact that maybe we have, tying of the roof structure to the main, using straps and that sort of thing, at least looking at construction that may make a home, as Bill asked just a few minutes ago, a little more secure. Do you see that sort of thing, Brian?
There's more awareness now. I think one of the biggest challenges, and certainly in an area like Dayton where you have urban sprawl, and this is true for any city, you have home builders that are building new homes, and they're worried about making their money. And that's not to disparage them. They have to make money. So they're much more likely to sell you a granite countertop upgrade because that makes some money. These upgrades to houses that would make them safer to tornadoes is more work. And they're probably not going to make more money. And actually, I'm getting ready to build a new house here soon, and that's going to be a demand of mine. But you mentioned safe rooms as well, and that's certainly been an uptick in demand here. The state of Ohio, through the Emergency Management Association, had some kind of subsidy to lower the cost of safe rooms. Here in Ohio, we can build basements with no problem. So there's a lot of people with homes with basements, and so that's still very much in demand too. But for homes that don't, there was a significant uptake in demand in this area for the desire to put in an above ground safe room. But for the most part, there's a lot of basements.
Thank you.
All right. So we got a question from the tweeter, not to be confused with the face bag. This is the tweeter. My question for McCall is, what is the biggest lesson she learned from the outbreak, and what could she have done differently?
Well, I think it kind of goes hand in hand with what Andy was saying just a few minutes ago, if you were listening, and not to say it's ego, but put it aside and reframe your thinking. And while we may have had one path of thinking earlier on in the day, you need to kind of scratch all of that and look what you have and be confident in what you're feeling and what you're seeing, and make sure that you get that information out there. Because in this situation, the last time that I got to talk to anybody was at 6:30, and then the next time they saw me was when this outbreak was starting. So being a little bit more confident in that. And also that being human really does get the message across. I was very embarrassed about getting emotional that night, but I heard time and time again stories afterward that it was because of that they realized that this was the real deal. It wasn't mechanical. It was a serious situation. And so using that to my advantage, I guess, moving forward and trying to make it personal, and that I know you and you know me, and we're a family and we're a community and we're going to get through this together, is a tool that I'll be using as we move forward.
Well, what is the typical relationship there between the broadcast community, the National Weather Service, the EMs? Are you guys using National Weather Service chat at all?
Yeah, we use chat, and Andy will joke all the time if he's working and he's chatting in there. We're somewhat in a good place, but as soon as he's like radio silent and you have no more responses from Andy, then we know that this is not going to be a good night and not a good situation. But everybody in there we're very tight. We've all, at this point, I think, met each other, and they know me and I know them. I have, their phone numbers, their emails, and vice versa. So I think that we've broken those boundaries and we're becoming more of a family, I think, media, EMs, and National Weather Service at this point. So I'm excited to see how we continue this as we move into the future.
So you get along okay with all the other television Mets at the other stations then? You
I
actually
do.
go in the same room together?
We have actually been in the same room. Actually, it was in December we were all in the same room, and there's a lot of females up here, and we're very female power for meteorology, and we'll take pictures with each other. And I know each and every one of them. Brian Davis, who's the chief Met at Channel 2, as well as Jamie Jurosik, who's the morning there. I messaged them 2 days after the event of the outbreak. And I was like, hey, I know it's been crazy. I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. Brian messaged me back and he told me that, he's doing better, but it was a little crazy that night because his son was in Beaver Creek, not too far from where the EF3 tornado happened. So we communicated on that level. We understand each other. Jamie Simpson, who was the chief at 2245 at the time, actually hired me at Channel 7. And then he went on to go to the competing station, but we're still very close to this day. We respect each other and understand that, when it comes down to something like this, to me, it doesn't matter what channel you're watching, just be watching somebody. You can't ignore the call.
Hey, Troy, the ladies have this secret Facebook group for the female meteorologists. They mock us. They mock us. I've seen some screen grabs. They make fun of us. It's rough. So I don't even want to see any more of these screen grabs.
Probably deservedly so.
I was going to say, you deserve it.
Deservedly so, probably. I hate to say it.
There's no doubt about that. So in a couple more questions, McCall, and again, just talking about the coverage, you say you were not able to go on TV in prime time. Is that a Cox deal, or what's the deal with that?
No, I can go on. Our protocol is if a severe thunderstorm warning or tornado warning is issued, we go on. And so the first time we got a severe thunderstorm warning was at 9:00 in the evening. Our next newscast typically doesn't start until 11. So yeah, I can cut in and I can be on as long as I feel that it's necessary.
Let's get to the good stuff. Did you get any hate mail after this event?
No, I didn't.
No, come on.
I did not. I did not. So, it was insane.
If
I did, it was very small in comparison to the people just being thankful that we were there. I was fortunate because Jamie Simpson, who worked at 2245, had The Bachelor on. And so he got a lot of the hate right at the beginning of the event. And when he cut in, it was right at the beginning. And people, even at that time, were unaware of what was about to happen. And then as it happened, whatever hate mail might have been there was gone. Like nobody had anything negative to say because they realized, wait a second, this is this is not a joke.
Yeah.
You know, things are getting messed up. So nobody wanted to say anything bad. They just wanted to say thank you. And that was, to me, one of the most shocking things the days and weeks that followed is meeting somebody and their house is completely destroyed behind them. And they were like, thank you so much, but really, we're all right. You should check out our neighbors around the corner. They weren't even concerned that they were going to have to move out and had nothing left. So it was a very surreal type of situation.
Well, James, don't
We
forget
have we have
too,
world
this
we have
is
world class
prior.
haters down here.
Yeah. No, this is all prior, James, to COVID-19, where we all learned to love and hate each other. So, you know, that's all been in the last 6 months that we've gotten that hatred. So,
Yeah. No, man, I cut off a basketball game. I've shared this story before on Christmas Day. This was Cleveland and Golden State. And this was a tornado in the city that could have killed 50 people. The warning process worked beautifully. The first email I got, what do you think it said? You should have been aborted by a coat hanger. See, these are the haters I deal with down here. I mean, they're world class. Andy and Brian, real quick for you guys, and we're going to bring in Bruce here in just a second to talk about weather radio. But it seems to me that many of the markets in that part of the world have a problem, and again, I call it a problem with siren dependency. They think that's it. They're going to hear some World War II air raid siren going off to let them know a tornado's coming. And they just don't understand it. You need a weather radio. It's not that hard. If you got a smoke alarm, you get a weather radio. Well, what's the weather radio penetration like in those markets there? Andy or Brian, one of you guys could answer if you know.
Yeah, I'm not really totally sure the numbers on it. I know we have enough that if the climate product isn't playing at 3 a.m, someone's going to call us up and let us know the climate product's not playing at 3 a.m. So, I mean, we at least have listeners, you know. I want to make sure people have multiple ways of receiving a warning. I want weather radio to be one of them. That's a good one. If they've got other ways too, that's excellent. Obviously, over reliance on older, less reliable systems is not the way to go. We just want people to be informed, and we want people to be able to take action when those warnings come out. Weather radio is a great way to do it. I wish I knew more specific answer for your question, but I agree with you.
We have a really unique issue in that we have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base here, and they will issue airfield alerts for lightning within 10 miles of range, or if a cow passes gas and it shows up as a couplet on their radar,
show title,
they put out a warning. Yeah. So we have this huge issue where there's tons of warnings being issued broadcast, and the community can hear it over the loudspeakers within a couple miles. I can hear it from my house 2 miles away. So you have that versus the standard, I'd say standard outdoor sirens. So one thing that's always been a concern to me is that people get siren fatigue because of the Air Force Base, because there's so many warnings that get issued, even though it's not technically for the areas outside of the base, that people, by and large, might start ignoring it. With this event, it was just so apparent that there were very strong tornadoes that wasn't the case. But for more marginal events, that's certainly a concern of mine.
Brian, is that your real hair?
Yes, it is.
Wow, man.
Brian, it's the hair
jealous.
envy phase of our
jealous,
show now.
I'm enjoying it while it lasts.
We got to take a quick time out, and we'll be right back. But I've got to bring in Tony Rice and Jen with their Tornado Talk. 1974 is the year. Ooh. I love 1974 because I was a senior in high school. That's how old I am. But I'm sure Tony will talk about the Perseid meteor shower. We'll have Jen, and we're going to come back with our weather roundup, picks of the week, and a lot more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
The Perseid meteor shower is active this week. It peaks the evening of Tuesday, August 11th. Unfortunately, the moon also reaches third quarter that same day, so viewing opportunities will be a little more limited. To make the most of your time, look to the darkest part of the sky around 11 p.m. through about 12:30 a.m. local time. This gives the radiant point between the Perseus constellation and the W-shaped Cassiopeia constellation enough time to rise, and that reveals meteors that would otherwise be hidden below the horizon. The sky begins to fill with moonlight around 12:30 a.m., so meteors will be more difficult to see. Expect this year to see around 10 meteors per hour from a reasonably dark site. You may have seen some articles claiming 100 or more meteors per hour. And about that, as my grandmother would say, bless their hearts. That figure likely comes from the zenith hourly rate, or ZHR. ZHR is a theoretical maximum for the meteors that you might see under otherwise perfect conditions. That means under a dark sky with zero clouds, but also from that one place on Earth where the radiant point is directly overhead. That ensures that no meteors are hidden below the horizon. This year, that place could be in Northern Europe, so if the clouds cooperate, Tarma will be sure to give us a report. But for the rest of us, ZHR is a handicapping system. It's useful for comparing meteor observations under different conditions around the world. It's not very good for setting expectations. The Perseids are one of the most active meteor showers of the year and worth taking a look at. They also occur during the more pleasant summer evenings. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, August 12th, in 1974. A destructive tornado crossed 7 miles through parts of Delaware County, Iowa, striking the southern parts of Ryan. It was given a rating of F4. A total of 44 homes were hit, 20 of which were destroyed. The West Delaware Grade School, St. Patrick's Catholic Church, and several other businesses were also demolished. There was a total of 12 injuries and no one was killed. Newspapers reported that receipts from a home in Ryan ended up in Galena, Illinois, over 60 miles away. I was encouraged to write a summary about this event by a resident of Ryan. Helen Liness sent me an email providing scanned photos of the tornado, newspaper clips, and personal stories. Helen's son was born a week early, 2 days after the tornado missed their home in Ryan by 4 blocks. The tornado developed on her father-in-law's farm. Helen wrote in the email that over 45 years later, quote, all that is still standing of the farm buildings are the house and the shed that was built to replace the barn. We are happy to report that our daughter and her husband bought the farmhouse and acreage and are raising their family in the house built by her great-grandparents. Check out our website for the full summary about this event and hundreds more at tornadotalk.com.
Those are the best stories, Jen, those that have the personal angle like that. That's really outstanding. Yeah. So thank you for sharing, Jen.
Thank you.
We've got the Hollywood Squares now. And Brian, you're in the middle on my screen, so you're Paul in for the remainder of the show. But we are very proud to have Midland Weather Radio as our sponsor for WeatherBrains. And every week at this time, our friend of the show, Bruce Jones, joins us to talk about the voice of the National Weather Service, NOAA Weather Radio. How are you tonight, Bruce?
Very good. Very good. I was just looking at all the storm reports for the straight line winds today. It's hundreds, 700 straight line wind storm reports today at SPC?
Yeah, a little derecho moving through the Midwest, kind of shake things up a little bit, huh?
Yeah, I got a, what do you call it, James, a tweeter? I got a tweeter.
Yeah, on the tweeter.
Friend of ours lives up in Chicago. She said they had the tornado warnings and all this, and people were freaking out, and their phones weren't working. The outdoor sirens didn't tell them anything, and they went on their phones and did a search for storm warnings, and up came a video of me talking about NOAA Weather Radio. So there you go.
You're everywhere, Bruce. You're
Every home
everywhere.
can have a NOAA Weather Radio. Yeah.
Now, Andy, I want to bring you in for a second because you told a story at Ohio State about a couple, and you mentioned them tonight, but not the part that I want to talk about. They were in West Milton, and they went to that interior room, middle of the house, and those were the only walls standing. You mentioned that on the show tonight. But this gentleman was talking to you after or during the survey, and he said, we didn't have very much warning, but you knew you pushed the button that night in the warning, and he had 18 minutes. But it's hard to tell, like you said on the show tonight, a man whose life is, blown through the field here, that he's wrong, even though in this case he was wrong. So, but if he had had a NOAA Weather Radio that night, because I imagine that location, from what I could tell, is right in the middle of where the Dayton transmitter is, he would have gotten that warning, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that warning was out, like you said, 18 minutes, so he would have had plenty of time. That warning would have obviously gone across right away on the weather radio, sound the alert, let them know it's coming.
Well, that was a lesson to me, Bruce, and that's the comeback a lot of times when we hear that. We got no warning. We had very little warning. There wasn't sufficient warning because there is a long distance between when Andy hits that button at the National Weather Service and, you know, somebody taking action. We referred to it several times tonight. And the fastest way to short circuit that is NOAA Weather Radio generally.
It really is. And it's, you know, the official voice of the National Weather Service. They basically have their own radio network. And we did a little calculation recently, just adding up all the numbers with Radio Shack and Oregon Scientific and all of these different manufacturers over the years that have sold weather radios. There's probably 100 million weather radio receivers out there, including all the two-way walkie-talkies now, Cobra, Uniden, Midland, Motorola. When they make those walkie-talkies, they're putting a weather radio button on those. And those things are sold in 2-packs and 4-packs. So somebody walks out of Bass Pro with a 4-pack of those walkie-talkies. That's 4 more weather radio receivers out there. Yeah, we had a lot of fatalities in Putnam County, Tennessee, that Cookeville tornado that came through at 1:48 in the morning, and the cell phone towers failed. And, you know, that's heartbreaking. People were relying on their cell phone only, thinking, well, this is the modern way to get these warnings. I understand that. I have a cell phone. I love my cell phone. But NOAA Weather Radio has been operating successfully now for 50 years using the radio frequencies. Radio frequency gets through in a lot of cases where a telephone signal might not. So we try to encourage everybody to have multiple and redundant ways of getting these warnings. Everything is good, but don't pass up NOAA Weather Radio because it's still the standard and it's the official voice of the National Weather Service. And as soon as that radar operator at National Weather Service hits that tornado warning button, it is literally 1 second or 2 seconds before every weather radio in that county is alerting on that tornado warning. We want to remind people that these devices are extremely important. They're just as important as a smoke detector. You wouldn't think of living in a home without a smoke detector, but your home needs to have, you know, a storm detector as well.
Well,
There's my
that's
spiel.
an important part of our house. And James, you got a slide for us, because if that gentleman is crazy enough to be watching this show tonight in West Milton, and there, we've got a deal for him, don't we, Bruce Jones?
Absolutely, yeah.
And,
If you're a viewer of WeatherBrains, if you enjoy the show, if you'll go to midlandusa.com and use the promo code SPAN15, you get 15% off of your weather radio purchase. So it's just our way of saying thanks to James and everybody here on the show. And thanks to all of you who watch. And please get the word out. Encourage everybody to have multiple redundant methods of getting these warnings, because any system can go down. Any system can go down. You need to have a backup for your backup. And the best way to save lives is to have multiple ways of getting these warnings. Our National Weather Service is the best in the world at doing severe weather. And it's a shame when there's a 10-minute, 18-minute, 20-minute lead time on a tornado warning and somebody gets smacked by it and they go, I didn't know it was coming. And
yeah, you have a little saying that you always say, Bruce, about that, so remind me what that saying is that you say. I like a lot.
You know, they say, well, I don't want to be overwarned. I don't want to be overwarned. Well, I used to tell people, that overwarning is a minor inconvenience. It's an interrupted night's sleep. That's overwarning. Underwarning is a funeral. So I understand that overwarning is a bother. It's a bother to me too. And I'm a weather geek. It still bothers me to be awakened in the middle of the night, but I would rather be awakened and not need it than the opposite, because the opposite leads to funerals and heartbreak. 15% off when you go to midlandusa.com, use the promo code SPAN15. Give these things as gifts, give them as wedding presents, give them as graduation gifts, Father's Day, Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas. You know, a lot of people will put off purchasing a NOAA Weather Radio, but you who know about severe weather or watching this right now, you understand what the risk is. So, you know, think about your family and encourage people to use these devices and encourage them to use everything at their beck and call.
Yeah, one of the best $25 purchases at our disposal. Thank you very much, Bruce, for being here. And we're going to finish out the show. Thank you for joining us, and stick around with us for the rest of everything. James, you can take it away for the weather roundup.
Yes, somebody just sent a note. Please ask Andy about his basic storm spotter review segment when he teaches the advanced spotter class. So, Andy, I'm asking you.
All right, well, our basic class is 2 hours long. Our advanced class is usually about 4 hours long. And so sometimes people are doing the advanced class, they haven't been to the basic in a while. We want to give them a review of what they would have learned at the basic class, but we just don't have the time to put another basic class into the advanced class. So I do the 2 hour basic class in about 45 seconds. It's
Wow.
basically, this is a shelf cloud, this is an updraft, this is a downdraft, this is a tornado warning, this is your thunderstorm warning, this is how you report wind, this is how you report hail, this is why it's not safe to go chasing, this is where your reports show up on our website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rapid fire, one right after another. It's very difficult to memorize. I have to relearn it every single year when I do it, and now that we had a little break in between, it'll be even harder next time. But it's hard to do with a straight face when the audience is eating it up, but it's a lot of fun. And does it actually review it? I think so.
So I have an advanced class question for you, Andy or Brian or McCall. So I would like to know, what is this? I shared the wrong one. Hang on.
Well, we want to know what that was too.
Yeah, I was like, what was that?
There's an
I'm not
X-ray
paid
of God there.
So let's see. Can you guys see that by any chance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're off writing.
They must cover that in the expert class, which I'm not a part of.
Atmospheric
That's when you
candles.
get to heaven and you get the storm spotter training, James.
No, so this was yesterday, and over the St. Clair County, Alabama, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Standard towering cumulus cloud. We have these every day in the summer here, and there's video too. I mean, this is not a doctored picture. The people send it to me privately, and I've got I've got stills, I've got video. This is not a doctored photograph. So, what is it? This has been the weather Twitter conversation all day. I first went to Harold Brooks, my man Harold. Kim, you know, I just have to go to Harold to start with. And,
Harold knows most things, so it's a good place to start.
Right. The man knows a lot. And, I went to some others. And so anybody have any thoughts on this?
I've never seen anything like it, so that's a no from me.
I don't know.
I mean, the banding structure looks like, was there the presence of any, speed shear that could explain at least the banding structure? The rest of it is it like, I don't know. I'm totally, is it Virga falling into, a shear zone? I have absolutely no idea.
And for those, and most people listen, it's not really fair to be talking about this, but you go to my Facebook page and you can see it. It's really, nobody knows. And I think sometimes in weather, it's okay to say that you don't know. I've said this over and over and over. Humility is missing in our science. There's a lot of things we don't know. There's a lot of things we can't do, and that's okay. But we have to be honest. And the three items I saw most today, number one is a crown flash. And I did a quick, about 5-minute study on that. I'm not so sure that's what this is. The other is a sprite, and sprites are typically above the troposphere. They're way above these thunderstorms, and you see these things at night. I just can't imagine that being a sprite. And the other is some type of, Pileus formation where you had some Virga coming from that. I don't know, but anyway, that was the interest. Anyway, that's my pick of the week. So if you're listening to this, when you get a minute, go to weatherbrains.com and you'll see that is my pick of the week. And you can look and see if you can figure it out. If you can figure it out, please hit me up on the Twitter. I would love to know what that is. So, and Bill, I hate to do this, but I have got to go to Studio A. So that will let you pick up the picks of the week here and roll from here.
All right, James. Thank you very much. Well, we'll start with our hostess with the mostest tonight, Jen Nairmore. I bet you've got a pick of the week for us.
I do. It's from a future guest, future weather brain. Lon Curtis will be on with us at the end of the month. And I have an article. He's written a few articles for Tornado Talk. And today is the anniversary of the Central Texas tornadoes associated with Hurricane Allen. It was a 2-day event, but the bigger outbreak was on the 10th. Troy, you know a lot about this, back in 1980. And so Lon he's so great. And he just did a great overview of this event and kind of broke down the meteorology for us. So check that out.
And Lon will be the guest on the show on August 31st. So we'll have that looking forward to in about 3 weeks. So that's exciting. Thank you, Jen. We'll come back to you, McCall. I know you are gathering, if you haven't already gathered, your pick of the week. Brian, you too. Troy, you're now the Paul Lind of the Hollywood Squares group here. What's your pick of the week?
Well, thank you, Bill. I kind of getting a late draw here from the pick of the week. I just thought I'd tell you to keep any meteorologists from going to the 5th floor and threatening to jump off. We got just a little while ago a Twitter note from Daryl Hertzman up at Iowa State, and of course Daryl was right in the middle earlier today of the system that moved through. And Daryl sent a picture, a little bit of damage to the back of his home. He lives a little bit south of Ames, but he does tell us, and I have sat here and watched it during the show. The Iowa environmental mesonet is dead in the water right now because there is no power at the university. And he actually tells us that, and he tells us it may be a while. They're telling them up in Ames before the power comes back on campus. So meteorologists, if you're trying to get data from the Iowa environmental mesonet tonight, or maybe early tomorrow, you're going to have difficulty. Please stay away from tall ladders and 5th stories of buildings. Until it gets returned to service.
We do like that side a little bit.
We do. Yep.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Troy. And Kim, what you got for us tonight?
Yeah, my pick is going to be a fun one. I'll actually ask for quick opinions on this. There was a story a couple days ago that Jason Samenow wrote for the Washington Post, but there'd been a little bit of dust up ahead of that article where there's a group that announced that they are now vying to get heat waves named as hurricanes are named, and as some organizations and countries name mid-latitude cyclones that produce winter weather hazards. Now there is this proposal to name heat waves. What are feelings? Troy looks like he just shot himself.
Please,
Troy, stay away from those
please,
5th floor
please.
buildings, those ladders.
Please.
I'll say I'm not a fan of that, but I don't like the naming of winter storms.
I don't either. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, there's too many nuances that go onto it. They're so different.
Yeah.
And I think it would add to the confusion.
Well, we've just come out of the ice storm that I never pronounce as the ice storm, the real name, because I never could pronounce the thing. So, don't complicate my life, please.
So McCall, did you have an opinion on whether we should be naming heat waves?
No, that's a big hard no from me.
Yep.
Brian, I bet I already know Brian's opinion.
Yeah, nope. The insurance
Just
industry
say no.
only deals with named storms for hurricanes.
I doubt the
that's all
weather
we do.
service. I doubt the weather service is going to start naming them anytime soon
No.
either, right, Andy?
I'm not allowed to opine on this one.
So whose idea is this, Kim? Where's
so
this idea coming from?
Oh man, it is really interesting, and actually, it looks like insurance industry is sort of involved in this initiative, Brian. So I don't. If you want to take a look at the article and see what you think, it's the new the Rockefeller Foundation, which had run the 100 Resilient Cities initiative for several years. That has ended, and now they're doing something where they're just really focusing on the problem of heat globally, and they've assembled some group of people, including the WMO, some representatives of WMO, some NCAR scientists were involved. I'm a little unclear on who all has been involved, but they tried to suggest what are some of the ways we can really move forward on raising awareness for heat threats and improve societal resilience. And to me, I was expecting to hear anything but this. This is the last, and they sort of said this is probably the best thing we can do up front to try to get attention. And in the Washington Post article, they talk with some of my colleagues in the social sciences. They talk with great people like Gary Sejkowski, who when he was at the Philadelphia forecast office, I believe he had helped to start. They have a very tremendous citywide planning initiative that they do for whenever there are big heat waves. the whole city kicks in, and there's a lot that goes on to help vulnerable people. And yeah, they all sort of said, well, I'm happy if it's something that helps raise awareness, but no one can point to anthropomorphizing heat as a particularly good solution for any particular reason. So
Well, I
I'm
just got a
so
bullet.
over this naming thing.
I just got a bulletin here, Kim. The National Thunderstorm Association, watch Andy here. He's going to run real quick. The National Thunderstorm Association proposes tonight that all thunderstorms be named. Details to follow.
Oh my word! I mean, well, that's the thing. Where does it end? And we're just at the same time as you have, severe weather or derecho Bob. You can also have flash flood Tim and lightning bolt Harry. And it's just like, what are we doing, guys? What are we doing? What are we doing?
Rachel Bob, that is in the finalist for show title. Right there.
Ratio boy.
That's my pick. I kind of hope. I mean, it doesn't go anywhere. If there's not really strong evidence for it, the Weather Service, in their statement, they said that they are open to listening to the evidence. But if it's not very, very overwhelmingly strong, I don't think this is going to go anywhere in the U.S.
Troy will write a strongly worded letter on behalf of WeatherBrains.
Not tonight, but tomorrow. Maybe.
I'll sign that. I'm signing it.
In this regard. All right. Let's let Bruce Jones come in with a pick of the week. Bruce, you've been regaling with some great picks last few weeks.
Hey, James was talking about 1974.
Yeah, we got a lot of 74 through this show tonight.
There's Fujita's super outbreak map.
Yep.
His stuff. These are like works of art.
I know mine's locked away in a box back here in the,
mine too.
archive. I need to get it out and frame it.
Does Texas Tech still sell these things? That's where I got this one. I bought it from Texas Tech.
They have a website with all of a digital archive of all Fujita's work now.
It's archived. Yeah.
They're works of art. I mean, that one, the Grand Island, Nebraska, the night of the tornadoes where they had like 6 or 8 of them. I mean, that's a work of art. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough that the Weather Service in Birmingham had 2, and JB Elliott slipped me one back in the late 70s, and it's been a treasured piece of my weather collection ever since. So that's a great pick of the week. Thank you, Bruce. All right, Andy, what's your pick of the week? What you got?
Okay. On the subject we were discussing tonight, I'm going to pick our office's website, the National Weather Service Wilmington, Ohio webpage on the Memorial Day tornado outbreak. That page includes all of our official public information statements with the detailed information about the paths of the track length, the maximum wind speed, the F rating, and everything on every tornado from the event in our area, all 19 of them. That also includes a KMZ version of all of the track maps. So you can actually see the swaths that we determined from the surveys, both aerial and on the ground, to determine where all the tornadoes went. And the other thing on that page is we did a very detailed kind of look at a breakdown of the timeline of every tornado from that event and matching up each tornado and each segment of each tornado to the valid warning that was in effect with the amount of lead time that was available at that location. So it's a really detailed sort of a look at each tornado broken down by each segment that it went through. And along with all the surveys that we did in that event, it was a multi-week process to get everything done, get the web page done. I think Memorial Day was the 27th of May, and we finally put a wrap on everything on June 11th. So that web page was kind of the end result of what we did for there. Since the super outbreak was mentioned, I'll also just throw in, we've got a page on the super outbreak as well, including scans from pictures from the damage from newspapers at the time, and a very high-res scan of, I think, the map that was just shown, which is such a fantastic map. And I'll throw out a shout to a former ILN employee, Mike Kurz, who did a lot of work on that website and certainly deserves credit for that.
Outstanding pick. And I want to give you credit for letting me borrow the second pick that you turned in tonight, which is all of the recorded presentations from the Ohio State Symposium, which was the genesis of tonight's show. thank you very much for sharing that with me. And that will be my pick of the week. So everyone can go back and watch all the outstanding presentations, especially the ones by you, Andy, Kyle from Northern Indiana, McCall's great presentation, and Brian's also, along with a bunch of others, including Troy, including next week's guest, Greg Shore, who is the National Weather Service's Severe Weather Program Director. He will be with us next week. So we'll get a little more mileage out of this. And then on the 24th, Jay Hobgood is going to join us. So we get 3 weeks. It's like CERTS. We get like 3 shows out of that one conference. So we're really, really excited about that. So that's my official pick of the week. McCall, what you got for us?
Well, my pick of the week, because if you're watching or listening, you obviously like podcasts, and I am a host of a podcast. It's called Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast. It's very easy. And if you go back a year to around the Memorial Day tornado outbreak time, you can listen to my reaction literally 2 days after the event. We did a live podcast. So there's actually a video version of this as well in Old North Dayton. And Brian is a guest, and Brian walks with us through Old North Dayton, and he gives his analysis of the buildings there and how they were damaged, what type of winds would have caused this, the structure of the homes. It's very interesting to visually see it and hear the conversation. And really, I enjoy having these conversations with Brian to learn more about structures of home and how they are built and withstand these type of events. But then, of course, we have a lot of other things that we talk about on the podcast, all weather-related things, as well as astronomy. And it's really cool. So check it out.
That's outstanding, McCall. We want you to be a part of National Weather Podcast Month with us next year.
Yes.
When we do that in March, so we'll reach out to you and get you to be a part of that with us. No strings attached or money involved, just promoting awareness about weather podcasts, including this ancient one, Brian Wood, that's been around for about 100 years. We were podcasts before podcasts were cool. So, Brian, what you got for us tonight?
I'm a native of Northeast Ohio, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this past week, inspiration for a lot of us meteorologists from that area. Dick Goddard passed away, a legendary broadcast meteorologist who was on mostly on Channel 8 for 50 years, Guinness World Record for longest tenured television broadcaster. Just a lovely man. And he has a great book, which I actually have right here. Let me do my Vanna White, called 6 Inches of Partly Cloudy. The title is based on a forecast that he made over the lake effect snow zone, where he forecasted partly cloudy conditions and a snow band set up. And he had an angry call from a viewer saying, I'm out here shoveling your 6 inches of partly cloudy. And his book is full of fun stories like that, weather facts. He had an amazing career. He was an Air Force meteorologist who actually was part of the atom bomb tests out in the Pacific and forecasted for that. He flew with hurricane hunters. He was at the beginning of television and pretty much lived from the beginning of local TV news through modern times. He's got amazing stories, a whole chapter on spoonerisms, which is hilarious, just great stories, a lot of great facts. He'll certainly be missed, and his legacy lives on through all of us meteorologists from the area who draw inspiration from it.
He certainly was one of our favorite shows we ever did, Brian, back when we had him on, and he is and will always be a national treasure. There's no question. Thank you for that pick of the week. I know when we saw that he was ill in June, I feared the worst at that time. And when the news broke this past week, when James shared it with us, it was heartbreaking. And we did lose a giant.
For sure.
That week. But thank you for being here tonight, Brian, and thank you for sharing that. So Jen, a little shout out for all the boys. Give a little credit where credit's due.
Yeah, the Tornado Talk boys did great. They are really keeping me grounded here and focused on tornado history and research. And they were so excited to get the invite to chat and come up with questions. So shout out to my boys. And I told him, I said, Lon Curtis is on at the end of the month. So let's come up with some questions for him too. Of course, Gerald will be a big focus on that one, but other events we want to talk about too, and really pick Lon's brain. So, but yeah, shout out to my boys.
Well, barring any further business to bring up before this very astute group of weather folks, Troy, I'd entertain a motion that we adjourn.
I would make the motion that we adjourn.
All right,
Bill.
Kim, would you second that motion? I think Kim is assenting with that motion.
I
and
second the motion.
Amen.
all
Amen.
in favor? Say aye. WeatherBrains is the weekly netcast. It's all about weather. We do this generally every Monday night. Sometime there around Labor Day, we'll do it on a Tuesday night. I think that's coming up sometime on Tuesday, September 8th, and we'll have Matt Lanza. But otherwise, we're generally here on Monday nights. You can get us wherever podcasts are consumed. Where do you get, where do you have, what platforms are you on, McCall, with your podcast?
Google Play, Stitcher, WHIO.com, and your podcast app on your Apple iPhone.
Outstanding. Well, good. So that's all the same places we are too. And you can find us at weatherbrains.com. But until next week, when our guest will be Greg Shore, I'm guest booking officer Bill Murray. And as I always tell you, keep an eye to the sky because you'll always have something fun to look at. Thanks, guys, for a great show. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you guys so
Thanks.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Y'all were outstanding. Thank
Thanks.
you. Learned a lot.
And there was one left. All right, guys. Fun show tonight. Thank you guys for watching. And we'll see you next week. Got to go back and do some more weather back in here. Have a great, great week. Thanks for watching. And